Okay, so now I had to fix a line of code there. I added this line right there, and I modified that spot because the code I had there wasn't JSON oriented. So coming back here, there's the PHP code. Let me explain what this is. So what this line does is it calls a PHP function JSON decode, and that says, I'm going to pass in a string there, right here in the first argument. And that string represents, is a JSON encoded, sorry, a JavaScript, what is it, JSON? JavaScript object notation. So it's basically an object in JSON format. And we want to turn that into a PHP object. And this is the reference to it. Now this true here, I think true means convert it to an associative array. False would mean convert it into a PHP object. So there's a difference between associative arrays and objects in PHP. I don't use PHP, although I covered it in the spring quarter. So I'm not sure about that. Either true means either associative array or PHP object, one or the other. So let's see if this works. Well, we may need to tinker with that code a little bit. So this is a reference to an object, basically. Now, this is the code that we're getting. So what we want to send to user, what we want to send the server from the browser will look like this. The JavaScript object notation should look like this. Actually, we need to have quotes around that. That's a requirement, a JSON requirement. And say the name is Fred. Okay, so there's a data in a JSON format. It looks just like a JavaScript object. In JavaScript, you wouldn't necessarily need these. You could use them. It's okay, but you don't need these quotes in JavaScript. But you need them in JSON. Of course, you need in JSON and JavaScript, you need quotes there. So the data is coming in like that. And so basically, we're getting an object that has an attribute named name. So this request object has an attribute named name. So we access it using the dot notation. It could be that we need to do this. Once again, we need to just do testing to see what it is that works. Because I don't use PHP in general to solve problems. I'm more of a Node.js developer these days. But PHP is good, and it's worth to know and be an expert in that area. So we pull out the name out of the request data coming in, and we construct a string here. So if we pass in that object up there with the name is Fred, this string that I have highlighted will say hello Fred, dot. So it'll be a sentence. Now that string is it's a value associated with the key MSG in this array. So this is an associative array. I guess that's different than PHP object, but they're very similar. In JavaScript, associative arrays and JavaScript objects are the same thing, but in PHP, apparently, they're a little bit different. Well, associative arrays won't have member functions, for one thing, I'm sure. All right. So what do we do? Once we create this array, then we call JSON encode, pass in the array, and that'll convert, the outgoing message will look like this. The outgoing message will look like MSG colon hello comma Fred period. And it's the array that we could construct it. So the idea is the outgoing message is not static anymore. It's based on the data that we pass into it here. All right. This is similar to what you have to do with the GitHub API. You have to pass it some data, and it's going to return a response. But you know what? You don't pass it JSON data. I think you just pass it the raw HTML string by itself. I think that's why it's called raw there. Pretty sure this raw interface. So it doesn't take a JSON string actually. It takes something else. So that could be an issue because I haven't tested this yet. There could be an issue here where we say that the incoming data is of that type. So that may need to be changed. That may need to be changed to for that for the GitHub application. This might need to be text. What is it? Text dot something like that. What's the content type? HTTP content type text. Just content type text. Oh, text plain. That's it. Okay. Oh, I forgot that. It's text/plain. That might be needed. Maybe needed for the GitHub. GitHub. So just that's a note for you, just to think about that. Oh, but we put that 7 in there. Let's get rid of that. And now the JSON data. This is what's returned. This is the old. That's the old example. Now this is the new example. So now let's take a look at this. So now we want to call message.php. And we need to pass in, not null, but we need to pass in an object, but the name is Fred. So just go ahead and do it like that, just inline because it's so small. Notice I didn't put quotes around name. That's because this is not this syntax defines a JavaScript object. I'm not defining JSON here. So if I wanted that to be a JSON string, I would have to delimit it as a string, and then put quotes around the key. But that's a JSON string, okay? But we don't want to pass in a JSON string. We're going to pass in a JavaScript object. Now, as I said before, that's valid. That's a good JavaScript object, but these quotes are optional there. They're not optional here. You need that. If you take them out here, it's going to say, oh, Fred is an identifier, and it's like unknown. Fred is not defined. Okay, so it's looking at it as an identifier, but we want to say, no, we want a string literal there, just a string. So that's needed. So now we pass it Fred, and the response handler, we just display the string that we get back. Let's see if it works. Hello, array name. Now, how did that happen? No, we messed it up. Came back as array name. Is that because I need this? So let's take a look at that. Hello, Fred. There we go. Hello, Fred. Now, I like the other notation better, right? So what if we did that and we changed this to false? So we want this request to come back as an object. And we use this as an object here, see? We use that nice dot notation for objects. Let's see if that works. Parse exception. Object of class, standard class could not be converted to string. Oh. So that's, what line is that in? That's in line 9. So this is, I don't get it. It's probably the same thing. I don't know. I don't know PHP very well, so yeah. This is just a little baby code here. I bet you that works right there. Still no good. Cannot use object of type standard class as array in line 9. So we cannot use it as an array in line 9. So it's this here. It is an object of standard class. Oh. The notation, they don't use the dot notation of PHP. They use this arrow. Okay, there it is. Yeah, see, I couldn't remember that. There's the hello Fred. Now it works. So if we pass in false, it means request is an object, and then we use this arrow here to pick out the member variables and member functions. Once again, we pass in true here. This will fail because this syntax is only good for objects. We now request is an associative array. Let's watch that fail. Well, see, it gave us nothing, so that's a failure. And we want to call it like this. So what do you want to do? You know, it's whatever your preference is. You like the code to deal with objects or with associative arrays. That's the thing about PHP. It's a little messy. It's a very old language with lots of sort of additions pasted onto it. You know, PHP was not originally object-oriented. So, yeah, it's kind of nice to do it like this. No, I'll leave it at true, I guess. I'll leave it like that. So that's it, basically. Once again, you know, to interact with the GitHub API, you may need to send it like that. But if that's the case, and I'll let you do the research on that. If that's the case, you better change this this comment here, because the code is assuming that that the incoming object here is JSON, but it's not. But I don't know what is this GitHub API. You'd have to read this. Oh, look. It looks okay. Like maybe we're all right. So yeah. So this is an example. So it's going to be JSON. Render a markdown document in raw mode. The raw API is not JSON based. Ah, it takes markdown as plain text. So we just have to insert it in their directory. So this, if we use the raw API, it's going to be different than this. If we use the raw API, we won't be able to use this code here, because this code is assuming that we're sending the data as JSON, which is right here. So it's assuming that this guy here, request object, can be passed to stringify, and we don't want to do that. So we can you can either change the Ajax.js code to what you need to do this, or else use this. So we have to pass in text, mode, and context. You could pass this in as markdown here. That's Markdown. So the URL would be different. This is the URL as opposed to this URL. But if you use the first form of this one, then you need to include 3 parameters. Text is that's a string that the user entered in to the text area. Then mode, and can either be Markdown, so on, or GFM. So to render a document as user content. The default is Markdown. Oh, default. Oh, so maybe if you omit the mode, we'll just get a default, which I think is probably okay. And the context is the repository context only taken into account when rendering as GFM. So I think you can just get away with an object. You can omit these 2 arguments, I believe, and just have this, or those 2 attributes, and just have this one single attribute. It looks like that should work okay. So that means that you want to omit raw here. Let's do that. I want to craft this, and I don't want to do all the work for you because you need to learn how to do what I'm doing, which is bounce around and read and test and experiment. So I'm not going to go all the way and show you everything. You need to understand what I presented and play with it on your own. So here we go. We're going to get rid of this raw here. So now you can use, now we're submitting data as JSON. So now we don't, to do this exercise with that small little change that I just did, you can leave the Ajax code the same. So we don't need to do that. Our original version of the Ajax will work in this case. And that, by the way, you notice that's their first choice in their API. They have 2 forms. The raw is like the second one. So this pattern of submitting data as JSON and receiving a JSON response, that is the evolving standard. So that's why I think that's the best choice for your application, because it's adhering to the emerging or the emerged standard for this type of internet application. That's why I recommend that. Okay, that's it. Good luck finishing the assignment. It'll be a little tiny challenging for you, but hopefully that's enough to get you there. Okay, that's it.